Nurse Chapel brings Ensign Rizzo dinner. Theta 7 needs vaccines. And Spock leaves a bad taste in a creature's mouth. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton and Walter Koenig.
Okay. Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing a review of Star Trek The Original Series, episode 213. This is season 2, episode 13, entitled Obsession, written by Art Wallace, directed by Ralph Senensky. This was December 15th, 1967. Where were you? How you guys doing today?
Pretty good. Beautiful day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember why December 15th sticks out in my mind. There's something. Maybe it's someone's birthday. Anyway, first things first. Walter, when we told you about the episode, the first thing you said was, "Oh, I'm not in that one." And then what happened?
Considering that I didn't think I was in it, and in fact, I was taking notes when I heard my voice. Someone felt convinced I wasn't in it. I thought it was quite good. The sense of suspense and mystery was very well generated and sustained. We felt throughout the entire episode. We didn't know what was going on, and I think that the principal element that I found intriguing was an alien that looks like nothing we've ever had before. That concept of a cloud-like alien that had intelligence, that could respond. I said, well, that's interesting. That takes a little guts to do that, because you look at it and it looks like nothing. It looks like just a cloud, some gaseous stuff. So I was, once you suspend disbelief, it becomes a kind of an intriguing element in the story.
Yeah. You know who needed to suspend disbelief was Spock and Bones. They were busting Kirk's chops from the very beginning, and my first thought was, what? Why are they being so skeptical? What's the problem? But then they kind of explained it a little bit better. But Sirach, you've never seen this before. I think I remember seeing this one once a long time ago, and I remember Ensign Garavic. We'll talk more about him a little later because he pops up later. But what did you think of this one?
Well, I thought the episode was compelling. It held my interest. It had enough turns and plot twists for me to follow. There was, I thought it had moved at a good pace. And I didn't find myself at any point, thinking that it was moving slowly. So I do think that episode worked well. It seems like another episode in which, Shatner did a lot of heavy lifting and, carried this story, having to play out this backstory of this kind of passion and this motivation. I thought he did a very good job of expressing that desire. And I also like the conflict between, not the conflict, but the close observation that Scotty and Spock were doing to Kirk. I thought it was warranted because it did seem at times where Kirk was dismissive to people. When Uhura said, Captain, they want to know where, if we're going to head over there. He was very dismissive about it, and it seemed as if his demeanor had changed. So I think playing that subtle demeanor change was done well by Shatner, and it expressed a heightened sense of preoccupancy with this desire to do this.
Yep.
It's a great scene between McCoy and Shatner. where they really go at each other. I don't recall. I'm sure there may well have been other episodes like this, but I don't recall them. Of course, I'm so freaking old. I don't recall yesterday. But in any, they had a really great argument, and DeForest had a chance to really expound on his point of view. I was applauding them both for that, but particularly DeForest because he's wry and he has a dry sense of humor, and he has his moments with Mr. Spock. But I hadn't seen him go tooth and nail this way before, and I thought it was quite well done. What I don't get, I got to tell you, the young man, the young guest star,
Garovic.
Yeah.
I must say, I rush in to say that my hearing is not great. So that might be the reason. But there were close-ups on him, the youngest actor, who I guess was the son of the original captain. Is that right?
Yeah, Kirk's captain.
Those close-ups meant. I didn't know what he was thinking, and maybe you guys can tell me, because there were several. I mean, there were several. At one point, I thought he was the villain of the piece, and then discovered that he wasn't. There was, I guess, guilt involved in some way. Can you guys explain to me what that relationship was?
Well, for starters, his father was Kirk's captain when Kirk was an ensign 11 years back. That's the story there. And his father was killed by this gaseous cloud, right, as you know, and Kirk had this guilt that 11 years ago he didn't fire quickly enough or whatever. It was very similar. So enter Garavic, who, was a teenager, presumably when his father died. And so now he's going through that guilt, like you mentioned. Yeah, that guilt, that regret. He's unsure of himself. And maybe in some ways they were thinking, look, this is a window into young Kirk. This is a window. Now we can see how Kirk felt 11 years ago when he had his own failure. So maybe they were trying to really, give those close-ups for us to get this emotion. Maybe it didn't really play out. Maybe it didn't really work. I didn't notice it too much. So I don't know. That's what I think. I think they were just trying to really give us the emotional weight of the situation. What do you think, Sirach?
Well, I think the close-ups were used at several points. The first one, I think, was when he encounters the gaseous entity, and they use a close-up there to kind of highlight a moment in which he's deliberating on what he's seeing, I guess, taking in what he's seeing. And so they mentioned that delay reaction time comes when you're in a fearful situation like that, and sometimes you get in that moment. So I think the close-up for that moment was to highlight that pause, that deliberation, which eventually becomes a call back in the brief room with Kirk and Spock when he says to him, why didn't you react right away? And so they highlighted the not reacting right away with that close-up, just the observation. Then they went into the close-ups, I think, after the briefing, in which Kirk tells him, Ensign, you're relieved of all duties. And he dismisses him in a really abrasive way. And I think at that point, Kirk lays guilt and shame and responsibility on him that he didn't necessarily have going into the meeting. He felt sure of himself. Because remember, he actually fired a shot. So the other people didn't even get a shot off. He actually fired his phaser, just not in the first second, maybe 1 or 2 second delay. So when Kirk dresses him down in that moment, I think that's when the weight of letting down the crew, and not being reactionary in the right moment, and causing maybe the responsibility of those people's deaths, also reflecting on his own father. I think a lot of that was why that's what I felt the close-ups were about. But then I can also agree, Walter, that I felt at a moment that he was the villain in the episode, especially when he hits Kirk over the shoulder with the karate chop. And I'm like, is he going to
Yeah,
hit?
what was that? Why did they do that?
He wanted to be a hero because Kirk said, "You go back to the ship, and I'll stay behind and fight this creature. Somebody has to stay behind to be the bait to defeat the creature." And Garavic was trying to be a hero and say no, like we've seen a million times before, where they knock out the person, and then that person gets, brought back to the ship or energized back, transported back, and he's the hero. He sacrifices himself. He dies. The monster gets killed, and everybody's happy, and he gets his full arc. And I thought that's where it was going to go. When he did that, I was like, oh, that's really cute and great way for him to have his arc. But then Kirk just kind of shakes it off and beats him up. He's like, no, no heroes today, which was, I thought that was a really good twist. Yeah, I wasn't expecting
that. Was a twist. I didn't expect that either. But then again, then they go from fighting. It's weird because he karate chops him. Kirk comes back and starts fighting him, beating him up. And next thing you know, they're not fighting. They're working together again.
Only person in Star Trek history to get up from a karate chop. I'll tell you that much. But there was one other thing with regards to the close-ups that I noticed at the very end. And it was maybe in the final scene or the penultimate scene, there was a close-up of, Garovick, after something was accomplished, and it just kind of shows him. And for that first time, I was like, oh, I get it. He's actually kind of a good-looking guy. They're trying to get people to like this character. I didn't really notice it the other times. Maybe I'm taking notes, or maybe I'd missed a lot of the close-ups. But when I saw that close-up at the end, and they got the perfect lighting and the angle and the chiseled features, I was like, oh, I get it. They're trying to introduce this cool new, character that people are going to like. But then, Walter, do you ever remember seeing him again?
No, and the reason why I find your premise shaky.
Uh-oh.
He's too freaking tall to come back as a semi-regular.
You think Shatner wouldn't have liked it?
Taller than Spock. Nobody's going to be taller than those two guys and be a regular on the show.
Good point. But what if I told you he does come back in an episode of Star Trek? And it was 55 years later.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
This character comes back in Sirach, if you'll remember, the episode of Star Trek Prodigy with the Enterprisians. Remember when they were all saying funny? And then they based it off of this ensign that took a
Live
shuttle.
Long and Proper?
Exactly. Live Logs and Proper, where they do this instead of this, right?
Yeah.
And it was all based off of, we find out at the end of the episode, Ensign Garrovick did a solo mission, crash landed on the planet, and was presumed lost, and taught them the ways of the Federation. And as 100 or 150 years had passed, it had changed, and so that's why they all talked like parodies of Kirk and Spock, and they were called the Enterprisians instead of Enterprise. And Walter, I'll show you the episode sometime. It's really funny. Written by our good friend Aaron J. Waltke.
Walter, I have. Oh, you have a picture of it?
No, I was just going to say real quick that I looked that up, and what Aaron Waltke said, I don't see it now, but he said, oh, here it is. Similar to what we're saying here, which is, he said, I always found it odd that Garavic had such an arc in obsession only to disappear off camera and never be seen or mentioned again on the show, presumably like all the others. I wanted to give him a slightly bigger fanfare send-off and a tribute to all the other red shirts. It's a fun one.
Walter, my question for you is, when you said that you couldn't understand what he was thinking, was that an indictment on his performance? Did you think that his performance should have
No,
been?
I assume it's my problem. I'm at an age where I'm apologizing a lot for not understanding what people say. No, you know what? Now, this is really absurd. I qualify it and tell you in advance. It's an absurd criticism, okay? And whether it's encroaching dementia or
You get a pass, Walter. You've earned yourself a pass.
okay, Majel appears a couple of times.
Yeah.
First of all, she's carrying a food tray. I was wondering, have they made her a waitress? I didn't really see her in her capacity as a nurse. But now, prepare to really feel that I'm an idiot. Each time she stood and talked to somebody, one leg was a little bit ahead of the other. It was not 2 legs, 2 feet parallel. And what it looked like is somebody posing on a runway. And it was like a model. And that bothered me. Why? I don't know. But it's not the way you would stand.
I wonder if she was a dancer. Yeah. Do you know if she was a dancer?
No, I don't know if she was a dancer. She could have been. But I think what it's funny because I actually observed something else, and it's crazy that I'm going to also say it's a very absurd nitpick of mine, but it also had to deal with Majel's character. And there were moments in the infirmary where she was given close-ups, and they did that lighting on the eyes, that movie star lighting that I think, Walter, you talked about in the past. And it seemed inappropriate for the moment for me. I actually thought it was over the top. It was like, it was like the Gone with the Wind moment, but we're in an infirmary and this is not appropriate for the scenario. It's movie star lighting for just a basic, line about something. And it just felt like it should have been toned down to me. I thought it was a little bit too over the top. So I wonder if the posture, the lighting, I felt like there was an extra special sensitivity to, a showcase, and where you didn't actually need it. Let the showcase be the performance. Let the showcase be the person's, natural attractive qualities. But sometimes when you showcase over the top, then it takes away from the story. But no, I didn't notice the stance, Walter. I did notice the movie star lighting.
And I rush in to add a self-criticism. I was a little over the top theatrical in pushing those buttons, First of all, they were immobile. They didn't move. They were little plastic things. And it wasn't going to make the photons go any faster or more quickly when I was attacking them the way I was. That's one of those things. What?
You're not the only one who did that in this episode. I thought that Spock did that too when he was in the teleport room, when they were trying to teleport them in, and the signal was not coming through. They had a close up on Leonard's hands as he was pushing the buttons and twisting the knobs, and I thought to myself exactly what you said, which is, you don't really have to push it that hard,
It's a button.
Yeah. He was really like trying to. Yeah, it was over a little bit too much. And then I also thought to myself, why didn't the director kind of, why so much focus on the hand movement?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, part of what it was, and I read up on this, is because spaceships weren't invented yet.
Oh.
So, but I wanted to add something about Majel, about Nurse Christine Chapel, that I noticed. Kind of different than what you guys are talking about. And I asked about whether she was a dancer because I've known some dancer friends that do stand with one leg in front. It's just kind of like this weird. I think it's weird, but they feel comfortable. They kind of stand. They're just kind of trained to do that. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a musical theater thing. Maybe it's a dance thing. I don't know. But with Majel and with Nurse Chapel, what I noticed was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was like, this is the most we've gotten from her in an episode. Not just, maybe not the most screen time necessarily, but the most to do, the most lines, the most character revealing lines, where she's not just saying, yes, doctor. She's not just saying, oh, you need to whatever. She actually has a moment where she comes back to Bones and, he's like, oh, what's this? And she's like, oh, turns out it was all made up. And she said, oh, just practicing some psychology or just doing psychology or whatever it was, that, 2-word line she said. And then we go, oh, wow, smart, interesting, funny, coy, and that was the most we've gotten from her. And I wonder if this was also a concerted effort to kind of beef up her role. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but it felt to me like this was the most we got of her, and I liked it. I want the expanding. I want the expanding cast. I like Kirk and Spock and Bones, but I want to see more of everybody else.
There's an underwriting relationship that is never really elaborated on between Nurse Chapel and Mr. Spock. She has hots for Mr. Spock. But there was an episode where she did express her affection or her concern for him. And I'm not sure if that was the one it was, but she had something to do there,
Yeah.
Just, you had me on for one of the reasons you had me on, beyond my superior intellect and perception, is that I know stuff that went on backstage, and just for the record, she grew to hate our show.
Oh,
and when she got on Next Gen, she had nothing good to say about our show. I guess she felt abused, if in no other way than by her absence or her lack of contribution. But I did a talk with her, and they gave me the tape, and she, of course, criticized my performance in it as well. But this was already when she was doing Next Gen, and she wasn't happy about our show.
Yeah, she definitely was showcased a lot in this episode. I did like seeing her. I do like seeing other characters get developed. I'd like to see more Uhura storyline development. I'd like to see more Montgomery Scott development. I don't see enough of that. He's there, but he doesn't get enough backstory and certain involvement. But there's other things that I think they did very well in this episode. You mentioned DeForest Kelley. I thought he was fantastic in this episode. The looks that he was giving Kirk when Kirk was talking, he has this piercing look in his eyes where he's looks so skeptical and so judgmental.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It works well as a guy who holds Kirk accountable and holds his feet to the fire, because otherwise Kirk has this machismo where he has this alpha spirit where it's like nobody can tell me anything, but but the way McCoy does, the way he does that is he basically says he older brothers him in a way. You know what I mean? He kind of like, Jim, I'm telling you, you don't, you know, this is, damn it, I'm going to say whatever I want to say that's going to come and get you to see what I need you to see. And so I think he's like a big older brother type character. And I love watching that relationship unfold between him and Kirk.
Yeah, good point. Good
Mhm.
point. The other thing not the other things, I haven't really said anything substantial enough to be the first thing, but there were right in the beginning, Chekhov is at the science uh, position on the ship. We don't really, it's not really established what he's doing, but he's there. And there's a shot of the helm and navigator's consoles, and two guys we've never seen before and never see again are sitting there. You know, later on, Chekhov goes back and pushes those buttons so dramatically, but in that first shot, it's two guys' faces I've never seen, and I thought, well, we got two extras playing those roles, and we never bothered to establish anything about them.
Well, the thing is with them, the reason they did not come back and that we didn't see them again is because they didn't push the buttons hard enough. I read that. Their button pushing was very nonchalant.
Subpar pushing.
That's what it was.
Yeah. More passion. I've never seen so many red shirts die in an episode, though. Usually it's one or two. This is like batches of them.
Hey, actually, let's talk about that on the other side of the break. We'll take a quick break, everybody, and then we're going deep into some red shirt territory. We'll be right back on the Seventh Rule. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Sirach, Lofton, and Walter Koenig.
Hello.
Hi.
What luck. You have come on a great day. Here are the trivioids of the week. Spock and Kirk find pure tritanium. Tritanium is 21.4 times as hard as diamonds. And by the way, he said to be precise. I'm like, if you were going to be precise, you'd probably say like 21.43611, whatever. But whatever. The USS Yorktown is expecting a rendezvous with the Enterprise in less than 8 hours. Rizzo remembers a sickly sweet odor. Ensign Garavic missed a target at 20 yards away. Interrupting an autopsy report is not a disturbance. It's a relief. Spock requires an opinion. Theta 7 needs vaccines. Mr. Scott was doing an AID cleanup on engine number 2. Nurse Chapel brings Ensign Rizzo dinner. Spock leaves a bad taste in a creature's mouth, and Kirk was jealous. Mr. Chekhov computes a course for the Tycho star system. There's a lot of them today. Anyway, So red shirts, right, Sirach? Like, basically every scene was like, throw some more red shirts at him.
Yeah. It was like, they beam down, there's 4 red shirts. They beam back again, there's 4 more. I'm like, all right, guys, you're not going to make it back.
Yeah, the one of them didn't die. I thought they all died. I thought they had to all die. And when our guest lead was revived, I thought, whoa, that's different.
Another twist, I thought. Yeah. There were moments like that I thought were well written, as far as just slight deviances of what you thought were going to happen. For example, there was a moment there where I thought that Bones was going to put him on some kind of doctor restrictions and basically say you're not mentally capable to be in command. You're over the top obsessed, and we need to get these medical supplies. I mean, that was always hanging in the balance as well. So, I feel like the writer of this one is named Art Wallace, and a little research on him is he wrote for Dark Shadows, which was a pretty well-known show back in the day. But, one thing I really liked about what he did in this episode is he gave us the voice of Kirk as a narrative tool throughout this episode, and I thought it played well into the story. There were times there where Kirk was saying, I know they're questioning my decisions. I know this, I know that, and he was thinking out his own rationale for why he was making decisions, how it was affecting other people. And I thought that was also a great tool to help with the story. It gave us an insight on Kirk's mind.
Good. Good for you. I have another incredibly insignificant.
All right.
My sense of watching Bill for those 2 years and all those movies, that nothing he ever did was by accident. It was all under control, under command, and it was there for a reason. I'm not implying that it felt that way. It felt organic to what he was doing. But at one point, he takes his favor and wipes it across his face. Why? What did that mean? Do you even remember him doing that?
No, I missed that.
Yeah, he did. He wiped his phaser across his face, and there was no comment about it. There was nothing.
Interesting.
Knowing Mr. Shatner, I felt it was by design. I just didn't understand what the design meant.
Yeah, I'm convinced as well that it was purposefully done. I'm sure he's inside the character's head in the way that, this episode, and I'm surprised, I was waiting for you to say it, Walter, but this was Moby Dick, in my opinion. This was that the gas was the whale. And Kirk is trying to find it and catch it. And I thought that was that's what it felt like. It felt like the sci-fi Moby Dick. And I was wondering if it would have a resolution, because, of the way the original story goes. But that's what I felt. I felt, because, Spock talks about the greatest weakness being obsession. And then they talked about guilt. And these feelings are essential, the central themes of Moby Dick, this obsession. And so I felt like that's what they took and wrote it in for this character. And so, having said that, I believe that's what Shatner was thinking while he was doing this performance. He was thinking about this puzzle, this enigma, this experience, this whole thing that he's playing out in his head. And it was an obsession. And so I think with obsession comes certain kinds of tendencies of strange behavior. You notice that, for example, in Silence of the Lambs, the main character that Anthony Hopkins plays, his obsession and his character had a weird kind of list that he did when he was, it was like a succulent kind of thing. So he came up with a whole thing for that character because of the mindset of that character. And I think that Shatner did the same thing in this one. Another moment that he did that I really loved was at the time where they were talking about this thing's taking off and should we go and get it? And engineer says, "Hey, I can't give you any more. If we go any more, faster, this thing is going to blow or something."
Yeah.
And that was a moment there where Shatner chose to be very weak and vulnerable. He showed a side of himself there where he wasn't decisive. It was an indecision there. There was a moment where he wasn't sure if they should pursue after it or if they should just not and try to maintain the integrity of the hull. And you could see him deliberating with Spock on one side, and the way he's there was a moisture in his face. He had a little bit of a sweat to his face. And so all of that resonated for me in the performance. I thought he performed like a man who was obsessed and was almost, but then he also showed the rationality side of it. So he was very good at showing a crazy perspective, but also very deliberate, logical. His arguments were
Yeah,
you know, you couldn't
Right.
really debate his argument, right? I mean, there was a moment there where he asked the doctor. He said, "So, what is your evaluation going to be?" And they were like, "Well,
Right.
you
That was
guys,
the turning point. I got that highlighted in my notes too, because he convinced me
yeah,
too. Like he convinced us as the audience when he says, well, would you call it deadly? What if it is the same creature that killed a whole hundreds of people 11 years ago? What about if it can go, in a different part of the galaxy? Suddenly we're getting it. We're like, wait a second. Maybe it's an obsession too, but the point of the matter is this killed hundreds of people. It's in a different part of the galaxy. It's killing more people. This is actually a threat. And he asks Spock, then what would it be? And Spock says it could pose a grave threat to inhabited planets. And right now he's thinking, now you understand. Now you get me. And he says, what will you put in your medical log? And Bone says, my medical log remains open. And we all said, yes.
yeah,
a,
yeah,
a footnote to Mr. Shatner's performance. Yeah, he was definitely the leading man. He had lots of romances. His hand-to-hand combat, he usually won. He did what all the other leading men could do. In addition, there was a vulnerability that was not pleasant. It wasn't like a sensitivity. It was sometimes he got upset, sometimes he got jealous, sometimes he got envious. He allowed himself to feel those things and to portray them on screen, which made him very, very human. And I applaud him that. I applaud him the courage to be a complete actor and expose himself in ways that were not nearly as complimentary as other leading men demanded of themselves.
Especially at that time.
yeah, absolutely. He really explored emotional vulnerability that didn't show him in the best light all the time. And including in this episode, there was an indecisiveness there where he showed a vulnerability like, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to make a decision. And he did make that decision to go forward and chase after Warp 6, he said. But he also gave a great argument for intuition in this episode. That's another thing I thought the writer did a fantastic job. He said, intuition, however illogical, and he was telling this to Spock, obviously, is recognized as a command prerogative. Like it is a prerogative. You must be able to follow intuition, to listen to intuition. It is mission. It is one of the main points of your mission is to be able to have that intuition. And I thought, how great of an argument is that? Because the smell of that honey that he was talking about, that clicked his intuition. There were certain things that he couldn't prove, but he was able to articulate in a way in his argument that this was a threat. And I thought that intuition argument was well done in this episode as well.
Yeah. That's the human aspect. That's always kind of like Kirk's thing over Spock is, like imperfection or intuition. And I thought it was played really well too. One thing that I've got my own little nitpick, if you'll indulge me.
Okay.
So when Garavic and Kirk towards the end are carrying 1 ounce of antimatter, which is as powerful as 10,000 cobalt bombs, and they're talking about this, and they were carrying it very nonchalantly. They were Kirk's actually holding it and looking around. He's not even watching where he's going on unfamiliar terrain. I'm thinking you could hit and stumble off of any little rock, and then you're like, boy, this stuff's really. Oh, whoops. Anyway, that was just one little nitpick, but they were very casual with that thing as they're talking about how this thing could blow us all up. Walter, did that piss you off too?
Say that?
Did that piss you off as well? Were you livid?
Know something? I didn't observe it. Never reached my consciousness. But applause to you for pointing it out.
Thanks.
Yeah. I want to go back to one thing that I learned in this episode too. They were talking about the hemoglobin and the what they call it, red, the cells, the corpuscles
corpuscles, right?
Yeah. But we learned that why Spock's blood is green, and he was like, because I have copper instead of iron. And I thought that is a cool little science note for all the science fans out there. Instead of having iron in his blood, he's got copper. That's a cool little Vulcan little biology that I thought was a nice gem dropped into this. Very, very, very brief, but it explains the green blood, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that too.
And Leonard, I'm really traipsing along the very fine line here between what is acceptable and what isn't. Leonard got a letter. I remember it was the talk of the soundstage, asking whether his seminal fluid was also green.
Well, we'll find that letter and bring it to you right after this. No, that's crazy. I did also wanted to say the music in this was fantastic. I don't know if you noticed, the moments there where the music played out, but I thought the music really accentuated the piece. It just sounded great. I actually really enjoyed this episode. Also, the director, who's Ralph Senesky. Do you remember anything about Senesky, Walter? Anything stand out?
No, just a positive reaction that I think of him as in a very positive way. I can't recall anything specifically.
Okay. But what I liked what he did was there was a moment there. This was a shot choice that he did, and that was the scene where the doctor and Kirk are sitting in there, and he's basically telling him, "I'm going to have to, do an evaluation on you, and that requires another officer here." And so he goes to get Spock, right? And that transition shot as Doctor leaves, it ends on a close on Kirk looking out towards the door. It stays on him for a while, and then reveals, cuts right directly into the next shot where Spock is there, standing there with McCoy. So they never leave that shot of him, of Kirk, and they actually switch scenes. And I thought that was really cool. You went from one scene to the next without even moving the camera. It went right into that next scene. And I thought that was pretty interesting for me. I don't think I've seen that before. It was a very creative way to transition. It was like as if no time had passed. Boom, we're right back into the next scene. And I thought that was a great director's choice.
So, real quick, there was no Sulu in this episode. That was interesting. He must not have been available. I also thought that after this episode, Bones famously calls Spock a green-blooded hobgoblin. Maybe now he'll call him a green-blooded hemoglobin. I don't know. Maybe that's... I'm not sure. We'll have to see if he does. What do you think, Walter? No? Let's go into The home run of the episode. Sirach, who gets the home run of today's episode?
The home run for me goes to William Shatner once again. He just really carried this in so many ways. The just full around performance of the whole gamut of Kirk. I mean, minus the whole, woman, ladies' man aspect of his character. The other parts of his character, the leadership, the decision making, the whole argumentative side, and being on the right side. I thought he did great. When he says to the ensign, "Ensign, you're relieved of all your duties," and McCoy says to him, he says, "That was a little harsh."
Mm-hmm.
And the way he comes back to him, he says, You'll be filing reports, make your comments or recommendations then," or something like that. And it was a super hard comeback from Kirk. Basically, like, if you got a problem with it, put it in the report and make your recommendations, but this is what I'm doing. And I thought that was tough. It showed that toughness. And then he showed the vulnerability side. And the vulnerability side came even in the voiceover. When he said in the voiceover while he was laying in the bed with his hands behind his head, he said, "Am I letting the horrors of the past distort my judgment of the present?" And he was questioning himself. And I think that was great insight on just the depth of this character. That's how you write for a captain, in my opinion. You write a captain as being all encompassing and trying to see things from multiple perspectives and even questioning themselves, show us their rationale, show us their thought process. So yeah, William Shatner, home run.
Nice. What about yourself, Mr. Walter Koenig? By the way, happy baseball season. Baseball is here, and everybody is happy for it. Who gets the home run for today's episode?
Okay. Sirach eloquently nominated Bill, and he did. Everything that Sirach said, I affirm. However, I saw something, and I admit to a rather narrow experience as a science fiction watcher. I can't recall a lot of films that had aliens and etc. in them. I didn't watch a lot, but this to me was an exceptionally inventive alien. This cloud, as simple as it was something that I had never experienced watching this kind of story. So my kudos go to the alien, to this inventive idea. Simple, so extraordinarily simple in design, and yet so inventive because I'd never seen it before. So yeah, I'm giving the home run to the alien itself.
Very nice. You know what it actually reminded me of when you were just talking about that, Walter? Do you remember this movie, The Blob?
I had a friend who was in The Blob.
Oh, no way. Did he survive?
Yes, he's still alive. Okay. He's 91 years old.
Wow,
His name
cool.
is Tony Frank, and he played opposite Steve McQueen. He was one of the gang.
Mm-hmm. You said Tony Frank was his name?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, he's still alive. 91.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so I'll tell you, for me, the home run of the day goes to Nurse Chapel, Christine Chapel, because at least from my perspective, we got to see more of her than Yes Doctor or No Doctor or Spock's cute teehee. And I thought it was cool to expand her character. It gave us, I always want a second medical officer on shows because the poor medical officer, the doctor, always is basically like, just I'm the whole everything. It's just me, the doctor, and that's it. And if I want to talk to somebody, I got to talk to somebody that's not medical. And it's nice when they get an additional character in a pretty important part of the ship, pretty important character. I think so. It was nice to get that expanded role, especially considering it was Majel and we know her history and how great and important she was. It's just nice to see it. So that's mine home run of the day. Here are some people that hit home runs every day, especially now that baseball season is here. Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Plackman, Tom, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri, Titus Muller, Dr. Muhammad Noor, Anil O. Palat, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, aka Crewman Guy, The Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Henry Unger, Allison Leach Hyde, Julie Manosfi, Jed Thompson, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Glenn Iverson, Dave Gregory, Chris Sternett, Greg K. Wickstrom out in Hawaii, Cassandra Gerard, Chuck A., Chris Garris, and of course, Jason Oken, who won't make it today, and he's bummed about it. But everybody else will. We'll see on the other side on the free-for-all. We'll be right back on the 7th Rule. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the 7th Rule with Sirach Lofton and Walter Koenig. This is the free-for-all with Melissa Longo.
Hello.
And Chuck A.
Hello.
As well as Crafty Bear. We call her Carrie Schwent. You can call her Crafty Bear. Chris Garris is out in southeast Texas. I bet it's kind of warm there, right?
Not right now. It's cloudy and rainy.
Oh,
Nice.
Yeah,
what about New Mexico, Allison Leach Hyde?
66 and sunny.
We'll take it. TJ Jackson Bay looks like the Gorn today. He's out in Missouri. And Chris Garris has his stem bolt. I'm sorry, Chris McGee, the Dark Lord, has his stem bolt and chill shirt on. Oh, don't worry, we'll cut that right out. You watch. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
I would say like an 8.2.
Good guess. Walter, do you have a guess what it might have been rated on IMDb on a scale of 1 to 10?
Do I have a what?
Do you have a guess as to what it was rated on IMDb from all the people that voted on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, on Obsession?
Yeah.
8.
All right. You're an 8 too. Does anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
I'll go with a 7.5.
8.5 and a 7.3, I think I heard.
Right.
Okay, that's it. All bets are in. Everybody overbid. Oh my goodness. It's a 7.2. No. That's just Dikembe
Not in my
Mutombo.
house.
That's right. Good knowledge, Melissa.
Yeah.
All right, 7.2. Any non-appearance mentions? I didn't catch any.
0.2.
Dark Lord Chris McGee, did we have any some kinds of or some sorts of?
I'm afraid we didn't.
Scary. Well, Melissa Longo, will you please get us started off on the right track by telling us what you thought of this show?
Very many thoughts about this show. I like that we got some character growth and background for Captain Kirk. I like that they mentioned the Farragut and gave us some of his backstory from when he was serving on that ship. I love that kind of stuff. I love the character building. This episode always had a sense of urgency, kept its sense of urgency throughout. whether he was misguided in pursuing the gaseous entity or not. It's not far-fetched to compare this episode to Moby Dick, because that's basically the theme. Kirk is Ahab pursuing his white gaseous whale, and that just came to me. um, but there's one particular moment in this episode, one scene that stood out to me the most, and that was when Nurse Chapel was bringing the young ensign his food, because we got a little bit of her personality too when she's trying to coax him into eating. I thought that was wonderful, and I love it when we get a little bit more backstory from the secondary characters as well, because it fleshes out the show even that much more. I noticed when Spock was speaking that he shares, well, Ethan Peck shares some of his inflections and dialect, or not dialect, I don't know, just the way he says his T's or the way he says certain words. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds like Ethan Peck, which tells me Ethan Peck has done a lot of homework for his role on Strange New Worlds, and I think that's wonderful. I also noticed Chekhov when he stands up, and how trim he looked when he's being addressed by the captain, and the scene where he and the captain are firing upon the entity, and how you're talking over each other, and that felt really natural, and I enjoyed that part. Yeah, it felt like there was something dire happening, and that was really great. So yeah, overall pretty good.
That's testament to our extremely close relationship that we didn't have.
Thank you very much, Melissa Longo. Great stuff, as always. Chuck A, a.k.a. TNG Fanatic. You also like TOS, though. What'd you think of this one?
Well, I've always liked this episode. I like the scenes with Kirk and Spock, and Kirk and McCoy, and Spock and McCoy. Some really dynamic scenes. Bill Shatner was really good in this episode. The gentleman that played Ensign Garavic was also very good. I looked up the episode. I didn't realize, but Ensign Garavic was mentioned in part of the story of a Prodigy episode. Went blank on the name of the episode, but he where the
All the World's a Stage?
There you go. The Enterprising, and they called him Ensign Enso. They called him, and he was part of that episode. One thing that I also saw when I looked it up is that I remember thinking this when I was watching the episode. One of the first red shirts that got killed at the beginning, one of them was called Leslie, and that character comes back after he's gotten killed as the same name in other episodes. I saw that on Wikipedia or IMDb, but he gets killed off and then he comes back. So that was interesting as well. The scene at the end where he was trying to, Spock was telling Ensign Garrovick that it didn't matter that he hesitated when he fired because the entity could be elsewhere when the phaser hits. And then, of course, when Spock blocks the vent, and then they're surprised that he was still alive after that. And it was the green blood, of course. But I really liked the episode. It brought back memories. It's been a few years since I had seen it, but I always did like that episode. It was one of the episodes that Bill Shatner was really good at. Same with Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley. They were all good in it. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you very much, Chuck A, aka TNG Fanatic, another aka Crafty Bear, Carrie Schwent. What'd you think of this one?
I enjoyed this one. It's been a busy couple of days, so I only had the chance to watch it just the once, but I definitely did very much enjoy it. And there was one line that really kind of struck to me about monsters coming in many forms, and a big one being guilt. And yeah, that one definitely hits, because we have all played the what if game at one time or another. Like, if I could go back, if I changed this, and this, would that have changed anything? And Kirk is doing a lot of the what if game and taking it out on everybody around him. It seems off and on there for a little bit. But I did just a little bit of a shallow dive and found a couple things that I very much enjoyed. The name of Kirk's old ship, the Farragut, was apparently named after a Civil War naval officer who was credited for the phrase "damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." And apparently the full quote is a lot longer, but they abbreviated it to that. And I don't know, that phrase has always just kind of amused me just a little bit. And speaking of the Farragut, apparently there's also a short story called "The Greater Good" that has it takes place in the mirror universe, and Mirror Kirk, tired of his captain, that Ensign guy's father, that captain. Apparently, that guy was hard as hell on Kirk, and he got tired of being bullied by the guy. So he worked out some kind of deal, apparently, with the gaseous cloud monster to kill that captain and 200 of his crewmates in this short story. I might have to look that up, because that actually sounds kind of like a fun story. And yeah, I love the remastered effects in there. I have such a thing for clouds. Like the clouds behind me, this was taken from an airplane somewhere over Illinois, I think the Google told me. But I thought that looked really cool, the way it was just sort of floating in space and just sort of moving around. And the image at the end of the show of the planet with the crater, that was a new effect that wasn't in, I guess, the original version. But I thought that effect looked really cool, seeing the crater and like the ripples on the planet surface of the crater. And anybody who knows me knows I am a Twilight fan. So you give me some kind of vampire-like entity that sparkles. Two thumbs up in my book. And I loved how when it's attacking, it's all sparkly. It reminded me of those sparklers from the 4th of July. The kind of sparks that thing throws off. But yeah, didn't have a ton of time to really go deep on what kind of haiku to create, but I knocked out something quick, and I think it's kind of fun. So I'll finish with that. Haiku is just a little short one, if you recall. It floats and sparkles, prefers iron to copper, antimatter doom. And is it me, or did it look like when Spock was putting his hand over the vent, he was either trying to block it from coming in, or was he trying to mind meld with it, maybe? I couldn't make up my mind what he was trying to do there.
Was he mind melding? That's
He
what
was
I thought.
drying his hands like you do at the bathroom.
Yeah. You never know with Spock. He mind melds with everything.
Yeah.
He mind melded with that silicon, the Horta. So
Yeah.
Right.
maybe.
And V'ger as well.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Carrie Schwent, aka Crafty Bear. All right, Chris Garris with the V'ger Nam. What'd you think of this episode?
It was my first time to actually watch this episode. And so, yeah, I'd never seen it. I was able to get it in to be able to watch it twice in the last couple of days. And it's a good episode. It's actually got it's got a lot of intensity and action going on, almost from the first words. But it just, I don't know, it just seemed a little bit like Kirk was a little over the top at times, which is nothing unusual for him. But some of the scenes that kind of stood out to me, especially I was like, damn, when Kirk, talks to Chekhov and says, have you seen on the scanners? He goes, well, I've done 2 scans. Well, keep scanning and don't stop. I was like, damn, he's getting mad at him because he, only did a couple of scans. And also the scene that really I thought was hilarious was when Spock comes into McCoy's office and he's talking to him about, I need to ask you for, basically he needs to ask him advice. And he's like, okay, I got to get a drink for this because this never happens. And something I was wondering about though, I know smells trigger memories, but, does he if he always smells like honey, is he going to always think about that entity, or is it only if it's on a planet is he going to think about that entity? And so that was a little off there, just for me. And I'm going to save that part for things left unsaid. But the one scene that really stood out the most to me, and it's the first time that I can truly myself remember Kirk and McCoy really getting into it. And it was in that scene when he's in his quarters and, he's basically, Bones basically telling him, I'm about to, I'm going to write you up. I'm going to put you on report. And, Kirk's like, you're really getting to it, Bones. And it's starting to get personal. And he's like, no, really, I'm here to assess you. And, and I just like when he gets in his face, Bones doesn't cower down. And he just says like, no, we're going to do this, and bring Spock in. And, and then, and his, again, this is not the first time we've seen Kirk kind of go a little bit out on the edge, on the limb, and do things, because he's kind of taking a lot of risk here. And I just loved how Spock quotes him the manual. He's like, don't quote the manual to me. And so overall, it was a good episode. I liked how it ended. I did like the whole, it doesn't like, copper blood. That was a good one as well. So, but again, it was a good episode. Lots of, intensity, and they just wrapped it up in a nice bow at the end.
Mm-hmm. Just like you did, Chris Garris. Thank you very much for that, Chris Garris. Up next is Allison Leach Hyde. That's an awesome shirt. I see Sirach, Aaron, myself, Ramon's style. What do you think of this episode?
I like this episode. I mean, we go really hard on the Moby Dick plotline on it, but I really like it. And so it is a fun watch. It does make you think. I love the juxtaposition of Kirk and Ensign Garavic playing that, they're pretty much the same person, just at different times with this entity. And I thought that was really nicely done, especially that scene at the end where Kirk is talking to him like, what did you think? You were on the bridge. Like, how did I handle that? And he's like, not great. It didn't really work. And he goes, okay, now how does that apply to you? Oh, it would have been the same for me. I like how they did that. I thought that was really great, that Kirk has a great character arc in this episode, because we do start being completely obsessed and then learning from it. And so I like that. And I have to say that both Spock and McCoy are on point in this episode. They are doing a fabulous job. And Spock has some of the best one-liners in this episode. I've got a couple favorites, but wallow in a pool of emotion when he comes in to talk to Garavic. I'm like, that is great, because that is what he's doing. I also really enjoyed the lighting, where things were like background super green or background super purple, to kind of like express emotion of what's going on in the scene. I thought that was really great too. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It was fun. Oh, and it was a bad episode to be a red shirt. We lost lots of them. Every time we landed on on the planet, I'm like, there's more of them. This isn't going to be good for you. I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm. Great catches. Thanks very much, Allison Leach Hyde out in New Mexico. Over to Missouri, TJ Jackson Bay, the Gorn. What'd you think of this one? The Party Gorn, sorry.
Smells something kind of sickly, sweet. Smells like Teen Spirit. I'm looking at Carrie's background, and now I'm afraid to go outside because I think the cloud's going to come to me and drink my blood. Vampire clouds. I really enjoyed this episode. And for some reason, Siri is talking to me, but I enjoyed this episode. I always have, and it's been one of my favorites. And as always, I got a little more out of it in this watch than I have before, because I always do. And in this episode, I think I really appreciated Spock fulfilling his role as executive officer, first officer. And I think that shows up well when he goes to talk to Garavic in his quarters, because we often see him, counseling and providing, insights to Kirk. But as first officer, he's also responsible for the crew. And so it's nice to see him, fulfilling that role. They don't have a ship's counselor on board. And so, he's the one that goes and talks to Garrovick because he knows that he's depressed and that he's been beating himself up. And that Kirk was pretty hard on him. I mean, I think they all kind of were, at the beginning, before they realized that no matter what he did, the same thing was going to happen. And so I enjoy seeing that. Also saw Spock at the very beginning of the episode, really in character, being super specific when Kirk estimated that the rock they were there to mine was 20 times as hard as diamond. Spock says, well, actually, it's 21.4 times harder than a diamond. Interestingly, the piece that he phased off, when we see it pop off, it's like 3 times that size when they pick it up. So I don't know what's up with that. So yeah, Cloud Creature. I thought McCoy had one of the most interesting lines in the episode. Not necessarily because he was right, but but because it was funny. It was a catchy line. He says, "Well, you didn't care what happened as long as you could hang your trophy on the wall." Well, it's not on it, Captain. It's in it. When the creature was in the ship. Just thought that was funny and catchy. I would think to say that your trophy's in the wall, floating around. I also thought, Kirk had a good line when they're trying to get into the quarters to save Spock, and McCoy's like, "You got to open this door now," and Kirk's like, "Hold on for a minute," and McCoy's like, "But he could be in there dying," and Kirk says, "Well, if that thing gets out, he'll have a lot of company." And also a funny line when they beam aboard that I enjoyed. A lot of good lines in this episode. I think someone mentioned that, but I'm going to take them all in case someone else wanted to use them. And it was Spock, when McCoy says, "Well, thank heaven, Kirk's all right. And, we got everybody except for the red shirts back." And McCoy's like, "There was no deity involved. It's because I cross-circuited the bee." I think that's Spock's version of humor, right? Like, he knows he doesn't have to correct that. It's just funny, to watch them banter. And I always have enjoyed Spock and McCoy's relationship. So great episode. I have a whole lot left to say about it. I actually want to talk about intuition and Kirk's intuition. But that'll have to be for things left unsaid.
Awesome. Stick around for that. Thank you very much, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri. All right, Chris McGee, Stembolt, and Chill. What do you think of this one, Dark Lord?
Well, I'll be frank, but you can still call me Chris.
Thank goodness.
This episode has never really been one that I've cared much for. until I rewatched it yesterday. Now, over a decade since my last viewing, I appreciate it more, especially one of its messages, as Carrie observed, the consequences of guilt, mostly because of a recent experience in my own life. If I may get personal for just a moment. 2 weeks ago, I euthanized my cat, Zoe. She was 20 years old and had been deteriorating for the last few years, including displaying signs of dementia. Despite the evidence from my research and from asking experts directly that she was nearing the end of her life, I questioned myself for months whether or not I was doing the right thing, and I still question it even now. So I know that guilt is a hell of a thing to live with, even when everyone absolves you. And I'm sure each one of us here knows that feeling. But back to the episode, I agree with everyone else's observations, so I'll just mention a few brief observations of my own. I think my ear is tuned to the Doomsday Machine theme because I heard it several times in this episode when the entity attacked. From what I could see, as Allison had noted, we got a dead red count of 5 in this episode. It's a total of 5 red shirts killed. And I found it odd that McCoy could just walk into the captain's quarters without so much as a knock or a doorbell or anything. Yeah. Perhaps the crewman's quarters would always be unlocked, but the captain's? I don't know. And did anyone else wonder if that suggestion of flushing radioactive waste into the ventilation system was really a good idea? I don't know. It did work, yes, but I just maybe think, are you going to hurt others as well with that? I don't know. Anyway, so I'll go ahead. I'll say if any nitpicks for things left unsaid. Jump to my memorable quote or phrase of the episode, which in this case is just a 2-word phrase that was repeated a few times in the episode. That's why it was so memorable for me, is red corpuscle, which is just a fancy way of saying red blood cell.
But corpuscle sounds better. Thank you very much, Dark Lord Chris McGee. Appreciate that one. All right. Jake's final take. Sirach, any final thoughts on this episode?
I don't know if it's just me, but this episode, gave me gas. Yeah, there was a line there where I liked when the doctor says, crazy way to travel, spread his molecules all over the galaxy. He gets real grumpy sometimes, and so I liked him griping about teleportation. That was funny for me. I really think the writer did a great job on this one. This is Art Wallace again, making a villain entity like out of smoke, which is what Walter was talking about. That's an original idea, and I thought, what ways would there be to confront this, and how could you attack it? I mean, it made it a very slippery kind of villain. So I enjoyed that, and certainly a life form that we haven't seen before when it comes to life form like that. So another kind of inventive idea. I liked the episode. I thought it played well. A lot of red shirts died, but I'm kind of used to that at this point. This is probably one of the most. But yeah, I thought this was a great episode. Majel had a chance to shine. DeForest did a great job. Leonard did a fantastic job. And William Shatner was just an amazing actor, and he's always on full display. He doesn't take anything. He doesn't take any episodes off. He's always giving you a full performance, and that's one thing that you can always expect from him. That he doesn't take things lightly. He's really serious about the work. And so, yeah, I think that reflects in the story. I think the episode was good, and I'm surprised it wasn't rated higher. Given that was so long ago, such an original story, but well executed. Also, did notice the music as well. I thought complemented this episode. It was good music. So, I'm overall enjoyed watching it and would watch it again.
Mm-hmm. Walter, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah. Or you want to hear them?
If you could convert them from thoughts into words, man, that'd be great.
I direct this. I'm really not directing this to you, Chris. However, something you said is the reason why I have an addendum. No loss. There's no love lost between me and Bill. I think everybody knows that by now. However, I cannot hear without, and I'm not censoring you. Say it as many times as you want, but it really bothers me to hear somebody say that his performance is over the top, because he is a committed actor and he gives it his all every time, gives it his all. And that's part of his character. When he is, violently upset or whatever the passion that has gripped him, and it's expressed in his dialogue. This is not somebody who's over the top. This is somebody who is letting you in on who he is, letting you in on his emotion and his inner life. And I say bravo for his willingness to give his all and let you see it. So that's my comment.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for that, Walter. That's it for us, everybody. Thank you so much to Chris McGee, TJ Jackson Bay, Allison Leach Hyde, Chris Garris, Carrie Schwent, Chuck A., Melissa Longo, for myself, Walter Sirach, Mr. Aaron Eisenberg, and Melissa. Thank you all very much for hanging out with us. We will see you next time. And until then, always remember the 7th rule.